when 67-year-old Thomas Ray heard rustling sounds behind his barn that brisk October morning. He figured it was just the wind playing tricks through the stacked firewood. He was about to turn back toward the house when a low, almost painful growl made him stop mid-step. Thomas wasn't one to spook easily, but that sound had something desperate in it. He adjusted his worn flannel collar and tapped the handle of his walking stick on the edge of the log pile. A few dry leaves fluttered down, but the sound came again, guttural and strained. He slowly crouched down and peeked behind the split logs. There, curled in on herself beneath a sagging plank of wood, was a wildcat. Not just any wild cat, a bobcat, unmistakable from the tufted ears, the short tail, and the spots along her sides. Her breathing was shallow and her eyes were alert but dull. She was clearly hurt, possibly starving. And then he noticed the telltale roundness of her belly. She was pregnant. Well, Thomas muttered, adjusting his cap. You sure picked a heck of a place to give birth. He moved slowly, careful not to startle her. She gave a weak hiss, but didn't lunge. Thomas took that as permission enough. He backed away, went into the house, and called the nearest wildlife rehab center. It was over an hour away, and, like always, they were over capacity. Man named Nathan picked up, his voice as calm as if he were used to life and death calls daily. If she's pregnant and dehydrated and she's letting you near her, that's serious, Nathan said. We can't take her right now, but I can walk you through what to do. Keep her warm, safe, quiet. Thomas had lived alone for 8 years since his brother passed, and his days were quiet by default. Still, he'd never considered sharing his home with a bobcat, let alone one about to bring new life into the world. He set up a large dog crate in his workshop, padded it with thick towels, and placed a bowl of water and some shredded chicken near the door. With leather gloves and cautious motions, he managed to get the bobcat into a carrier and bring her inside. She didn't fight. She just stared. Thomas named her Mara. It was the name of a childhood cat they'd had on the farm, tough as nails and full of attitude. This one had that same fire, even dimmed by exhaustion. Over the next several days, Thomas called Nathan at least twice a day for updates and guidance. Mara was eating small amounts, moving very little, but responding to sounds. She let Thomas sit near the crate, even tolerated his slow voice when he read aloud the newspaper or talked about how much the world had changed since he was young. On the 5th night, the house was quiet, saved for the ticking clock and Thomas's snores. And then squeaking. Not the bobcat. Something new. By morning there were 3 in the crate. Mara had given birth. 2 squirming, blind little kittens nuzzled against her, their fur barely dry. Thomas stood there, mouth open. Well, I'll be, he whispered. You really did it, girl. He called Nathan again. They're healthy, Nathan asked. They look pink, breathing okay. They're louder than they are big. Thomas chuckled. And one already rolled over and fell into the water bowl. The kittens, who Thomas later named Ollie and Finn, wasted no time proving that they had big personalities in very small bodies. Ollie was the instigator always, climbing, falling, tumbling, and chirping like a bird stuck in a blender. Finn, on the other hand, had a stare that Thomas swore was sarcastic. He'd sit just out of reach and squint at Thomas like he was judging his flannel shirt choice for the day. Mara remained calm, attentive, and watchful. She never lashed out, never growled, not at Thomas. It was as if she understood he had saved her. When he changed the bedding in the crate, she would nose the cubs aside and give him just enough room to reach in. It was a kind of partnership. 3 weeks in, the kittens started to wobble around. Thomas built a small indoor play pen in the living room, using old laddie's panels and hay bales. He watched them climb and tumble and occasionally smack into each other, then squeal in protest before doing it again. Mara, never far, always had one ear turned toward them, even when she slept. Thomas sent videos to Nathan, who laughed at one where Ollie climbed up onto a low shelf and launched himself toward Finn, only to miss entirely and land in a bucket of mop water. That one's got zero coordination and no fear, Nathan said. You're not just fostering bobcats. You're raising a pair of stand-up comedians. Mara gradually regained her strength. She even began to purr, soft, growly, rare. Thomas never expected it, but when he sat beside her crate late at night, she'd sometimes rest her head against the side closest to him and hum that low, wild sound. The kittens, meanwhile, grew into miniature chaos. Finn learned how to open the lower cupboard doors and would vanish inside for hours, only to emerge covered in flour or dragging a can of soup. Ollie became obsessed with Thomas's slippers, often carrying one into the bathroom and leaving it beside the toilet as some kind of offering. At 6 weeks, the rehab center sent out to assess them. A young biologist named Eli arrived, clipboard in hand. He watched the cubs tumble around the living room like drunken acrobats and smiled. They're healthy, strong, and clearly believe this is their jungle. Mara watched Eli the entire time. She didn't growl, but she didn't blink either. When he reached toward Ollie, she stood up. That was enough. Eli backed off. They're bonded to her still, he said. And to you, honestly, that's going to complicate things when we talk about Ryan. Thomas had been dreading that conversation. I don't want to turn them into pets, he said. But I also can't imagine them alone out there. Eli nodded. There's another option. We sometimes place family units like this in controlled sanctuaries. Large spaces, limited public access, lots of enrichment. They're not cages. They're environments. But we'd want to do a gradual transition. And you'd be involved as their constant. You want me to go with them? Thomas raised an eyebrow. To help at least at first. And so the plan began to take shape. By the time the cubs were 3 months old, the house was no longer peaceful. One morning, Thomas woke up to find Finn perched on top of the fridge and Ollie trying to drag a watermelon across the floor like a prize he'd hunted. Mara watched them with the exhausted expression of any mother whose kids never nap. The transfer to the sanctuary happened in stages. First, Mara and the cubs were moved to a transitional enclosure on Thomas's property, a fenced-off portion of the yard outfitted with trees, climbing posts, tunnels, and hiding dens. Thomas visited constantly. So did Nathan. So did Eli. The first night outside, Finn climbed a tree, leapt too far, landed on Ollie, and both tumbled into the water trough. Mara didn't even flinch. Eventually, the sanctuary was ready. A 3-acre woodland, habitat thick with underbrush, shaded rocks, and a creek that babbled even in summer. Thomas walked it with the team, nodding approval. The day they moved in, Mara stepped out first. She sniffed the breeze, then turned back to nudge her boys forward. Ollie darted straight into A pile of leaves. Finn tried to catch a butterfly and walked face first into a branch. Thomas laughed. Same. Comedians, he murmured. Over the months, he visited weekly sometimes. Daily. He'd bring toys, meat, snacks. Sometimes just his voice. Mara always came out to greet him. The cubs now, sleek, lean, and shockingly fast, never lost their antics. One time, Thomas arrived to find all three waiting for him at the fence. Ollie had dragged an old tire to the gate as if offering a trade. By the next spring, the sanctuary offered him a permanent volunteer position, educational tours, wildlife support, mentor to new cubs if needed. Thomas took it. He'd gone from a solitary old man with a stack of firewood to the caretaker of a wild family, one that never quite stopped surprising him. Years passed. Ollie and Finn grew into full adults, still unmistakably themselves. Finn remained the thinker, often sitting atop the tallest log, watching birds and visitors with narrowed eyes. Ollie remained chaos incarnate, one day surprising a tour group by leaping into the viewing glass to slap a butterfly that had landed on the outside. The guest screamed. Ollie strutted. Mara aged with grace. She still approached the gate when Thomas arrived. She'd rest beside him on the other side of the wire while he talked about the weather or shared stories about the latest animal intake. On her final day, Thomas found her curled in her favorite spot under the cedar. Finn lay beside her, his head resting against her shoulder. Ollie was quiet for once, pacing nearby. She looked up when Thomas crouched by the fence. Their eyes met. She closed hers again and was gone. They buried her under the cedar, the boys watching from a distance. Quiet, unreadable. Afterward, Ollie dropped an old sock, one he'd stolen from Thomas years ago, beside the tree. Finn circled the area once, then climbed the cedar and sat there all night. Thomas stayed too. When the sun rose, Finn let out a strange sound, half growl, half call, half sorrow. It rang out through the still morning like a thread being pulled from something ancient. Thomas felt it, deep in his chest, like the echo of a bell rung only once but heard forever. It was goodbye. It was love, and it was the sound of something that didn't follow rules or logic. A family that never should have existed yet had. The wind shifted gently through the cedar branches. Finn stayed perched there, unmoving, a silent sentinel for the mother who had carried him into the world. Below him, Ollie lay curled beside the fresh earth, tail twitching now and then like a thought he couldn't settle. And Thomas just sat there, knees stiff, back aching, heart too full. He didn't rush them, didn't speak. He knew enough to let grief breathe. In the days that followed, Thomas returned again and again, not just to check on them but because something about being there felt necessary. The sanctuary staff gave him space, nodding in quiet understanding when he stayed longer than he said he would. Sometimes he brought tools and helped patch fences or rake trails. Other times, he just sat near the cedar tree tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick while Ollie rolled in leaves and Finn watched birds as if he could outthink them. The cubs, no longer cubs, still greeted him, still caused trouble. They were bigger, now sleeker, more wilder-looking, but not wilder. Not when Thomas was around. Sometimes they'd vanish into the trees, reappearing with muddy paws or burrs in their coats. But when Thomas called softly, they always came back, not out of obedience but something better. Choice. Evenings at the sanctuary were his favorite. The light turned gold, the trees whispered, and somewhere always there was the rustle of paws or the low huff of breath. Sometimes Ollie would appear from nowhere and drop a pine cone into Thomas's lap like a gift. Sometimes Finn would walk beside him, the two of them quiet and steady like old souls, with nothing left to prove. And Thomas, the old man who never planned on being anyone's grandfather, especially not to wild cats, had found something unexpected. Not just company, not just purpose, but a legacy built on trust, laughter, and a love as wild as the creatures he called his.